Brenna was laughing. Not that fake polite chuckle she gives me when I talk about my fantasy baseball league, the real kind. The kind where her eyes crinkle, and she slightly leans and like gravity's pulling her toward whoever she's talking to. It wasn't me. It was the guy in the bone-white suit. He was telling a story, loudly, about crashing a jet ski into a dock in St. Lucia. People were hanging on his every word like he was some kind of sun-kissed prophet. Even the bartender slowed his pour to listen. My wife had her hand on his forearm. Not his shoulder. Not his elbow. His forearm. The spot that's just intimate enough to make you wonder. I took a sip of warm Prosecco and stared out at the skyline like I was admiring it. I wasn't. I was counting floors. 32 stories up. Concrete courtyard below. Not high enough to end things, but high enough to break something. She still hadn't looked my way. He said something about good risk being sexier than safe returns. And she actually clapped. Clapped. Like a sea lion at feeding time. It hit me then. I was watching my wife fall in love with someone else, and the worst part was, she was doing it in heels I picked out for her birthday. I tried to move closer. Tried to be part of the circle. He looked over, eyes scanning me like I was a misplaced coat someone had forgotten to check. Hey man, you lost? I wasn't. Not geographically. But I was about to make sure he got lost. And he'd never see it coming. There's a moment during any event, corporate or otherwise, when the energy shifts. It's not loud, not dramatic. Just a quiet tilt in the air. You suddenly realize that you're not one of them. You don't belong. And the worst part? They're all aware of it, too. That moment hit me when I was standing near the dessert table, pretending to be fascinated by a tray of burnt creme brulee while Brenna and bone-white suit guy. His name was Sterling, by the way, because of course it was, made small talk that looked anything but small. She was leaning in again, laughing again, nodding slowly like she actually cared about his stock tips or whatever nonsense he was spewing. I felt like wallpaper, a human placeholder. At some point, another woman from her department, Kara, I think, slid up next to me and said, "Oh, you're the, +1, right? Not husband, not partner, +1, like I was a guest raffle prize." I smiled through it, told her I was Brenna's husband. Her eyes flicked briefly toward my chest like she was checking for a name tag. Then she raised her eyebrows and said, "Huh, didn't realize she was married." She never mentioned. She stopped, but the damage was done. My jaw clenched. Not because of Kara. She didn't know better. But because Brenna made sure she didn't. 3 years married. 7 together. And this was the first some of her coworkers even knew I existed. I excused myself. Walked past a cluster of interns giggling over TikToks and out to the patio. The air was sharp. Cold. Real. I gripped the railing and just stood there, breathing. That's when I heard Sterling's voice behind me. "Nice night, huh?" I didn't turn. "Surprised you're not inside with your wife?" he added, casually. Now I turned. He had his sleeves rolled up and that smug, banker smile like he was about to offer me a great opportunity if I'd just hear him out. I stared at him, not saying a word. He took that as an invitation to keep talking. Brenna's a powerhouse. Smart. Strategic. Bit of a mystery too, you know? Hard not to admire. I tilted my head. "You always admire married women?" He laughed, short, like it didn't deserve a full breath. "Relax, man. I just respect talent when I see it." Respect. Right. His tone had that careful arrogance. Like he was used to skirting lines, tiptoeing just close enough to plausible deniability while still getting what he wanted. I'd known guys like him in college. The kind who'd borrow your pen, flirt with your girlfriend, and then walk away with your internship and never remember your name. I didn't respond. Just smiled. That same polite, tight-lipped smile I've mastered from years of being underestimated. Because the thing is, he was talking to me like I was some fragile ornament. Like I was safe to taunt. Like he thought I didn't know what was happening right in front of me. But he had no idea who he was provoking. And Brenna? She had no idea what line she had just crossed by letting it all happen. I'd spent my life being careful, kind, quiet. Now it was time to be calculated. He made his move. Mine was coming, and it would wreck them both. I didn't go back inside immediately. I stayed on that patio long enough for the music to shift, long enough for my fingers to go numb against the metal railing, long enough to rehearse what I should have said to him. You ever do that? Argue with ghosts of conversations that already happened? I always win those imaginary fights. Out there, in the cold, I was brilliant. I had comebacks, dignity, presence. Then I walked back in, and all of it fell apart the second our eyes met. Brenna was talking to two women from HR when she spotted me returning. Her smile dropped half an inch. Just a flicker, barely noticeable to anyone else, but not to me. I've studied her face for years. I know when she's annoyed. I know when I'm inconvenient. She didn't wave me over, didn't call out. She just went back to talking, letting me drift around the perimeter like a forgotten handbag. So I went to the bathroom, not because I needed to, but because I needed somewhere to go. Somewhere I wouldn't be watched like an unpaid intern loitering near the dessert cart. Inside, I stared at myself in the mirror. The lighting was brutal. My collar was uneven. My posture slouched. My face looked tired in ways I didn't even realize. There was a toothpaste stain on my cuff. My wedding ring looked dull. I looked like a man who'd stopped being seen a long time ago. Then the door opened. It was Sterling. Of course it was. He walked to the sink beside me, washed his hands as if this wasn't some cruel cosmic joke, and glanced over with that same effortless smirk. "You doing okay, buddy?" "Buddy." I wanted to shove his face into the sink. But instead, I looked him dead in the eyes and said, "You always talk to other men's wives like they're prospects." He gave a low chuckle, dried his hands with a linen towel, and leaned in a little like we were conspirators. "You're reading too much into it, man. Brenna's impressive. She deserves attention. Don't be the jealous husband. That's a bad look." He said it casually, with that hollow kind of empathy rich guys fake when they're warning you not to make a scene before they do something unforgivable. And I realized in that moment, he thought I couldn't do anything. Not just because I wasn't physically intimidating, not just because I was the quiet husband in the background, but because he saw me as harmless, as irrelevant, as finished. I smiled. Not the polite smile from before. The other one. The one I hadn't used in a long time. The one that meant keep talking, you're digging your own grave. I walked out without saying another word. Made my way to the elevator. Pulled out my phone. Opened the encrypted folder I'd kept sealed for nearly a year. And clicked send. Not to Brenna. Not to Sterling. To someone who owed me a favor. Someone with access. And just like that, the game began. They thought I was invisible. But the thing about shadows? They move quietly. And they always know where the light will hit next. The drive home that night was quieter than the ride there. Brenna scrolled through her phone the entire way, thumbs twitching, eyes half-lidded like she was too tired to pretend I existed. I watched the city lights flicker across her face in the reflection of the window, and tried to remember the last time I touched her without her flinching or sighing first. She didn't ask me if I had a good time. She didn't apologize for leaving me stranded at her table for 45 minutes while she entertained a guy whose cologne still clung to her dress. She didn't say anything at all until we pulled into the driveway. "You seemed a little off tonight," she mumbled, unlocking her phone again. "Are you okay?" I wanted to scream. "Am I okay?" She asked that like I was a coffee machine making weird noises, annoying, but not worth fixing. I forced a smile and said, "Long day," then got out and walked inside without waiting for her. I couldn't look at her without picturing the way she laughed at his every word like he was some rare kind of genius, and I was just the guy who keeps the Wi-Fi running at home. But here's the thing Brenna never really understood. I'm not just some freelance tech guy who takes on boring projects from startups that can't afford full-time engineers. I build things. Quietly, cleanly, systematically. And I don't make mistakes. I log them, fix them, then use them. That encrypted folder I sent earlier? It contained a full audit. No, not of Brenna's texts. I don't snoop like that. Not even of her work email. She was too smart to let anything live there. But Sterling? Oh, he was sloppy. Earlier this year, during a short freelance contract I'd picked up as a favor for a friend, someone in cyber risk for a major financial firm, I got flagged to help with a quiet sweep of their partner networks. One of those networks belonged to a VC firm where a certain executive named Sterling happened to run comms. Turns out he had a habit of using unencrypted private channels for extracurricular conversations. He'd even used his firm email once to forward a private server address to a Gmail account registered under an alias that was so painfully obvious it may as well have been not Sterling at all 97. I didn't touch it back then. Didn't care. But after tonight, I logged back into the sandboxed mirror I'd cloned when testing the server vulnerabilities, pulled up his outbound logs, and fed them through a private sentiment classifier I built last year just for fun. A bot that could scan tones across thousands of text bodies and tag content by emotional intensity, time correlation, and recipient consistency. It took about 6 minutes. Brenna's name came up. Not in full. He wasn't that reckless, but in enough ways to make the implication clear. Redhead Queen Fire. Champagne Thursday again? Missing that little pause you do before you laugh. The laugh. Her laugh. He was logging her behaviors, storing them like bookmarks, cataloging her. He'd done it with others too, some named, some coded, some left anonymous with only identifying nicknames. But Brenna's appeared the most in the last 40 days. 40 days. Long enough to mean something. But it wasn't the flirtation that got to me. It was that she let him. Because even if she never physically crossed a line, she stopped protecting me a long time ago. And that's when I knew. She didn't think I had teeth. She didn't think I'd bite back. So I did something I hadn't done since we were dating. I sent her flowers. 24 white lilies. No note. Just silence. Because when someone stops seeing you, really seeing you, the first step isn't yelling or crying or begging for attention. The first step is making them look. And I was just getting started. I was sitting in the upstairs office when she called me. Not a text. Not a yell from the kitchen. She actually dialed my number. The irony? I was 30 feet away, and I let it ring 4 times before answering. Hey, she said cautiously. Did you send me something? I let a pause hang between us. Flowers, I finally said. Thought you could use something white in a world full of gray suits and red wine. She was quiet for a second too long. Then, they're beautiful. Just wasn't expecting that. Exactly. She wasn't expecting anything from me anymore. Not gestures. Not anger. Not awareness. And definitely not strategy. Which is why that was just step 1. Because Brenna didn't know I'd watched the footage. Not surveillance. I'm not that guy. I'm not a stalker. But I am thorough. The same firm I freelanced for earlier had contracts with multiple corporate event companies, including the one that handled her company's gala. It took me one message, a professional request from a former vendor contact, asking for B-roll access for editing purposes, to get the security angle recordings from the ballroom that night. There were 3 camera feeds. One of them showed the bar. The second showed the dance floor. And the third, the long, panning wide shot near the back patio, showed them. At the 9:41 p.m. timestamp, Sterling leaned in too close. At 9:42, she didn't step back. At 9:43, his hand brushed her waist. At 9:44, she smiled. And at 9:45, I walked in, visible in the upper corner of the screen, just in time to catch none of it to my face. I watched the loop 5 times. I didn't cry, didn't rage, didn't break anything. I just opened a document titled Deadweight Protocol, a private draft I had started months ago out of spite during one of our colder fights. Back when she said things like, "You're lucky I still try," and "Do you even do anything all day?" It was meant to be hypothetical. A mental exercise. A digital post-nup disguised as a system audit. I never thought I'd need it. Until now. So I opened it, line by line, and got to work. First, I pulled her secondary cloud drive password, the one I set up for her when she kept forgetting the login to her own files. I created the backup. I owned the encryption. I knew what folders she kept hidden. One marked work_journal, harmless. One marked 2023_personal, interesting. And one labeled simply trips. There were receipts. One from a wine bar in Aspen. One from a boutique hotel in Chicago. One from a rooftop restaurant in Dallas. None from when she said she was with her sister. I didn't need to guess who joined her. I already knew. But I wasn't going to confront her. Not yet. Because what people like Brenna don't understand is that love isn't always lost in a dramatic moment. Sometimes it dies in silence, strangled by polite dinners and half-meant kisses and nights where one of you sleeps facing the wall. And when it dies quietly, that's when it gives birth to something else. Not hate, not revenge, just precision. Cold, clean, surgical precision. So I kept the flowers coming. A new bouquet each day. Lilies, then orchids, then gardenias. Always white, always perfect, always anonymous. Each one more haunting than the last. I wanted her to ask herself, why now? Why is he being sweet when I feel so far from him? What does he know that I don't? I wasn't giving her affection. I was giving her anxiety, wrapped in tissue paper and floral tape. And she still hadn't noticed the missing email yet. But she would. And when she did, she'd realize she was no longer the only one curating a narrative. She'd realized the quiet husband watching from the sidelines had finally picked up the pen. She called me frantic the next morning. Not the careful, measured voice from the night before, This was raw, thin, like someone who'd just realized a tiny crack in a windshield can spiderweb across the whole glass. Lol. Did you see my calendar? There are meetings on my schedule that I didn't put there. And someone forwarded me a note, an expense I don't remember approving. She didn't say who forwarded it. She didn't say which expense. She just rattled off small, trembling facts and expected me to stitch them into some reasonable explanation. I could hear her walking in circles in the background, the microwave beep-beep like a metronome counting down her composure. I said I'd look. I sat at my desk, opened the same sandboxes I'd used the night before, but this time I did something I had avoided doing for years. I let the calm take over, and I stopped improvising. I followed the checklist I'd written when I was angry enough to plan, but not angry enough to act. That private protocol I called deadweight that now felt less hypothetical and more necessary. I started small and stupid, the kind of thing people notice first. I flagged the expense that had no approval trace, traced its route, and found a forwarded chain that ended with Sterling's internal alias. Someone at finance had CC'd the wrong list. Human error. Simple. Yet simple things break trust. I didn't send the log to Brenna. I didn't send it to HR. I didn't even send it to myself. I printed it. Old-fashioned. Pencil-smudged paper, because paper feels more permanent than a file you can click delete. Then I took a screenshot from the gala feed, the frame where Sterling's hand brushed Brenna's waist. I blurred faces of people around them except for the two. I overlaid the timestamp and exported it as a high-contrast image. I didn't add commentary. I didn't need to. Images carry their own accusation. I picked 3 recipients. Not the whole company. Not her friends. Not strangers who'd sensationalized the thing for clicks. I picked 3 people who mattered. One director in her department who I knew respected quiet competence. One mentor of hers who had always treated me politely at company events. And one old colleague of Sterling's who'd been burned by arrogance before. Each message was short, professional, and anonymous. A single line. You might want to review the attached file. Then the attachment, the image, one expense log, one innocuous but damning trail. I didn't want to ruin careers. I wanted to open eyes. Within 12 hours, the office was a different organism. People who had been casual when I left the gala were suddenly brisk, checking calendars, clearing appointments, passing notes. I could feel the change from across town, like a weather front moving in. Brenna texted me once. They're calling a meeting at 11. 2 hours later, a call I could tell she didn't want to take. Then silence. When she came home that night, there was a new tension in her walk. She used curt sentences, like she'd been practicing to keep them from trembling. She didn't meet my eyes until she stood in the kitchen, her hands folded around a mug like she was holding the only thing keeping her upright. People are asking questions, she said. Sterling is in a meeting. They found something. It was surreal watching her process in real time. The slow collapse of certainty, the way her face flushed then drained. I thought I would feel triumphant. Instead, I felt hollower than I expected. Not guilt. Exactly. More like an echo of the person I used to be who believed love was enough. But something new and strange. Power, maybe. Or simply the knowledge that the invisible things we do can ripple outward and become visible in a way we can't control. Later that night, she sat on the edge of our bed and finally looked at me. She was quiet for a long time, like she was choosing words from a drawer she hadn't opened in months. Why are you doing this? She asked. Not angry, not accusatory, just hurt and bewildered. I could have answered with truth. Because you let yourself be cataloged. Because you made me feel incidental. Because I was tired of being small while you grew enormous in other people's eyes. Because the man who smirked at me needed to see he wasn't untouchable. But I didn't. I said only. Because I wanted you to look. She stared at me as if she was trying to remember the shape of my face. For the first time in years, she seemed to be searching for the person behind the quiet, and I realized she didn't recognize him anymore either. That night she slept with her back to me, and I watched her for a long time. I felt no urge to touch her, to explain, to plead. Instead, I reviewed what would come next. There were more messages to send, more careful nudges to prod the right people, more public and private mirrors to place where they couldn't be ignored. I told myself I wasn't trying to punish her, only to expose what already existed. But now the exposure had a cost, and I was the one paying it. Not with money or reputation, but with the small, ongoing intimacy that had slowly decayed between us. There are games where the first person to blink loses. There are other games where blinking is the only way to see the opponent's face. I didn't want to blink. I wanted to watch. I wanted her to choose, not because I demanded it, but because I wanted to know if the person I married still existed under the smooth professional veneer she wore like armor. And for the first time since all this began, the question felt mutual. You'd expect a moment like this to come with screaming, a slammed door, a thrown glass, some dramatic crescendo where everything breaks loudly and fast. But that's not how it happened. Instead, it began with Brenna sitting across from me at the kitchen island, her hands flat on the marble like she needed something cold to hold her together. She wasn't crying. That would have meant she'd let go of the performance. No, she was still clinging to her dignity, like a woman trying to keep her hair dry in a storm that had already flooded the house. "They're suspending him," she said. "Sterling." The name came out smaller than usual. No edge, no flair, just a breath of what it used to be. Internal review. Ethics committee. Possible breach of client confidentiality. She didn't look at me when she said it, just stared at the middle of the counter like something would rise from the granite and explain the last 2 months to her in plain English. I didn't nod, didn't say I'm sorry. Instead, I asked, "Did you love him?" She blinked, just once. I watched her pupils tighten. She hadn't expected that question. Not phrased like that. Not from me. "No," she whispered. "It wasn't like that." I let the silence settle like dust on untouched furniture. "Then what was it like?" And that's when she broke. Not loudly. No wailing or drama. She just deflated, like a party balloon popped in slow motion. She covered her face with her hands, elbows on the counter, and I heard the kind of half-sob you choke back when you know you're the villain and there's no one else left to blame. "He made me feel important," she finally said. "Seen. You're always in your own world, Lowell. Your screens. Your silence. I needed." She trailed off. "You needed applause. You needed flirtation. You needed confirmation that your beauty still held currency in boardrooms." But I didn't say any of that. Because at the heart of it, she wasn't wrong. I had retreated into silence. Into work. Into a version of myself that was easier to manage alone than beside someone who never stopped reaching for more. But she never gave me the chance to reach with her. She ran ahead. And when I didn't chase fast enough, she turned back and found someone else already keeping pace. The hardest part? I still loved her. Not the woman from the gala. Not the polished executive with flawless email etiquette and secret trips to hotel rooftops. But the woman I met when we were both nothing. When we shared ramen over cardboard boxes in a barely furnished apartment, and she once cried because I said she made burnt toast taste like a feast. That woman was gone. Or buried. And I wasn't sure if I wanted to dig anymore. Later that night, she brought in the last bouquet of white tulips I'd sent. She didn't say anything, just stood in the hallway holding them like they might answer a question she couldn't ask. Then, quietly, she placed them in the trash. And that, more than anything, told me everything. Not anger, not guilt, just finality. The script was ending, and she was already stepping off stage before the curtain finished falling. But I wasn't done. Not yet. Because the next morning, I walked into the firm where she worked. Not as her husband, not as the shadow on her LinkedIn bio, but as a speaker, an invited guest to the quarterly summit on cybersecurity and VC systems. I'd been booked 3 weeks prior. They just didn't know the connection. I stood on that stage, blazer zipped, mic hot, watching the faces of men and women who had only ever known me through the shadows of her stories. I wasn't Lowell, the quiet guy with a laptop anymore. I was the architect of the breach detection system they'd read about in the Sterling scandal briefing. And suddenly, I wasn't invisible. Not to them. And certainly not to her. The applause was light, but genuine. That polite, measured kind that says, "We didn't expect that to be as good as it was." The conference host shook my hand and made a joke into the mic about finally seeing the man behind the firewall. Everyone laughed. Even Brenna, from the third row, where she sat frozen in her chair, her badge twisted backward, her hands clasped too tightly in her lap. We didn't speak that day. Not at the event. Not on the drive home. She took a cab without texting. I let her. She needed space to process it, and I needed space to figure out what I really wanted next. Because the thing about revenge, the clean kind, the cold kind, is that once it works, it leaves behind a room so quiet, you start to hear parts of yourself you forgot existed. The following week, I packed a small bag and rented a cabin 4 hours away, surrounded by pine trees and the kind of silence that doesn't accuse you of anything. I didn't go to escape her. I went to meet myself again, the version of me that wasn't building systems to hurt people, but to protect them. On the third night, my phone lit up. A message from Brenna. Just one line. Would you meet me for coffee? No scripts. No defenses. Just us. I stared at it for a long time. Part of me wanted to delete it. Another part, the part that still remembered the toast, the old apartment, the girl with wet hair and no makeup who once said she loved the way I listened. That part said yes. So I did. She picked a quiet place. One of those hidden cafes we used to stumble into before either of us knew what quarterly bonuses or VPNs were. She was already there when I arrived. No makeup, no heels, no armor. Just a cardigan, old jeans, and that same nervous habit of spinning her ring on her finger. We talked for hours. She admitted it, everything. Not just about Sterling, but about the loneliness that crept in slowly, how we both stopped trying at the same time, how silence turned from comfort to punishment. She didn't make excuses. She didn't cry for pity. She apologized. The real kind. The kind that makes you sit back and feel like maybe you're not crazy after all. And I told her the truth. That I didn't do what I did to destroy her. I did it to wake her up. And, selfishly, to remind myself that I wasn't just some half-present placeholder in my own life. That I could still move pieces on the board. That I mattered. She asked me if we were over. I didn't answer right away. Because I didn't know. I still don't. But I said this. We broke something. But that doesn't mean it has to stay broken. I'm not ready to throw it away. But I'm not going to glue it together just to pretend it never cracked, either. We left it at that. We started therapy. Together and apart. We go on long walks now. Not because it fixes everything, but because it helps us face things. Because sometimes healing isn't a grand gesture. It's a quiet one. A cup of coffee. A walk through falling leaves. A long overdue, I'm sorry, that actually lands. We sleep in the same bed again. No one's waist gets touched by strangers. No more hotel receipts. No more white lilies. Just us, bruised but still breathing. Still trying. And for now, that's enough.